In this video, I want to talk about the consequences and the sort of details of growing up too fast and growing up in an environment where you are kind of forced to be a parental figure as opposed to what you're supposed to be, which is a kid, you know? I think that it's very interesting, like this phenomenon, that sometimes you are like the parent when you're in a situation when you're younger. Maybe you don't have that strong traditional mother and father influence both there to provide that foundation of security, and there are ripple effects that if you don't have that, you're going to experience. So I just want to like dive right into this, and I'm just going to freestyle and talk about this and the nature of this phenomenon and my experience with it and how I'm using my awareness to get over that and become a person who's not like affected by conditioning. So let me just get straight into it. Apparently there is a correlation between, having to grow up too fast / being in a childhood situation where you're not really able to be an innocent child. Like maybe things happen that made you sort of lose your innocence, or certain things happen, like certain dynamics were taking place that essentially forced you to be the responsible individual in the household, which is a weird situation, right? Like when you're a kid, you should be able to run around and fuck around and sort of be irresponsible, be crazy, and be a kid. Like you should have that. And unfortunately, that's just not the case for a lot of people in a lot of situations, In my situation, it was an interesting one. I was essentially raised by a single mother who had a sort of weird host of mental health issues, I would say, personality disorders. Functional, but certainly these were present in her life, and they definitely contributed to a unstable household and, a very like insecure foundation. Now, I don't blame my mom or feel any like malice towards my mom about that, but it is just the case. And for example, like I remember when I was a kid, and I remember just feeling like I was responsible for her in a way. I was like, she didn't have it together, and like I felt like I needed to really have my shit together at a very young age and be controlled and be like in control, or else no one else was gonna like answer. I was not gonna be able to answer to anybody else. It was just me. So that's what I recall as a young guy. Because again, my mom was unstable and my dad was not around. So I remember looking back, and I was extremely uptight as well. I was really uptight, and I was always trying to like avoid getting into trouble. Whereas my friends who had more traditional families and more traditional parents, they were able to have this freedom, which I like was jealous of. They had this freedom almost to be rebellious and to be crazy and wild. And if they got in trouble, it felt to me, and it probably was the case, that it was more like they would answer to their parents and, didn't have to directly deal with the consequences of their own like youthful, irresponsible actions. And it's a crazy kind of thing to think about. But anyway, that's just in a nutshell what my childhood was like. With time, I sort of learned to realize that this is going to be intertwined with codependence, because when you're a kid and you're forced to be in that stage so early of like this pressure and this responsibility and this need to feel like you have it under control, you develop this complex of needing control. And also it's like high pressure on yourself to succeed, and high pressure on yourself to get to certain like levels of status, and sometimes unrealistic expectations for yourself. And I've definitely grappled with all those things. And it's like a mixture of that conditioning, which is sort of complex, and it's also, trying to balance that with genuine ambition and genuine drive and, perception of your own talent and wanting to succeed in your own way. But one thing I would say is a very slippery slope is the codependence and the independence complexes that I think those are sort of intertwined. Because when you're again in that situation of like instability as a kid, and you're the responsible person in the household, not your parent, it's like you develop this independence complex where you can just always sort of default and run away to yourself. And that's great, and it's in a way it's empowering to be able to be independent. But what I would say is that it's highly dangerous, because from that you can develop this like introversion, which becomes a crutch. You can develop this tendency to cut people off if they are not with the program that you're on, which is also pretty toxic and pretty dangerous in the long run. A whole number of things like that, which are not healthy to your developing mind in the future. But I would say mainly the codependence thing. It's a funny thing that not many people really have touched on, but here's the thing. If you have codependence as a man, which you developed from, likely an unstable childhood, where, in which you were sort of, your emotional needs were not met, there's a good chance that you might run into a chick with BPD. And if that is the case, there's going to be an inclination for you, this is like the narcissist in you, not saying you're a narcissist, but you might have narcissistic tendencies if this is your upbringing. There's going to be an inclination in you to want to control and fix women with similar mental illnesses that your mother had. Very rarely do you hear this on YouTube and advice like this. I've heard it like one time, and when I heard it, it blew my fucking mind, because I was like, that is so fucking accurate and fucked up and crazy too, that I just like completely was shocked. But it was so immediately recognizable for me, because I was like, wow, I had a unstable mother who had mental, personality disorders that I could see as a kid and definitely understand now. And I was forced into a position of responsibility when I was young, understanding our finances, our precarious financial situation, etc. I then met a girl who did have probably BPD, and I realized in the aftermath of that I was trying to fix her. Like I knew she had issues, but I was like, they were endearing to me. It was endearing, and I wanted to help her. And then when it ended, I was like, damn. I saw this YouTube video. I forget the YouTuber, but he mentioned that the narcissist is essentially looking to save his mother. And yeah, that was what I was trying to do. And these are just some consequences of this state of being. And I think that the solution in all this is realizing that, number one, you have to be aware of the fact that you're probably being run on a program that you developed as a kid. So you don't necessarily have to be an introvert. You don't necessarily have to run away from, people who are not serving your needs. You don't have to be exclusively independent. And I would even go as far as arguing is that if you've developed these complexes, then you have to start learning to do the opposite of what you're conditioned to do. For example, like collaboration. If you have this complex where you're just like totally self-reliant and independent, you're going to eventually come up against struggles, because nobody really does stuff purely alone, and nobody really accomplishes much purely alone. We're attached to a billion different sources of like security and people that build the systems around us, and we need other people. And realizing that is like a huge first step to kind of getting better and understanding that. I would say the first step is really understanding why you are like you are. If you did have a childhood where your like innocence was sort of robbed and you had too much responsibility to really be a kid, then that's step number one. Step number two is realizing you can just change your habits. You can change that programming. You don't have to rely on these automatic responses. What I would also say is you have to really ditch that need to have control. There are so many situations in life where you're going to have zero control. Honestly, in most situations in life, you have zero control of the outcome. In fact, my favorite quote that I've kept coming across is, you can only control the input, you have zero control on the result. You can only control the input, you have zero control of the result. And that can really be repeated to remind you to stay sane, because oftentimes it's like we want to just like smash the door in and just get the result that we want, but it's really important to keep in mind that we can't manipulate the universe. We can only put our work in and get the result out that we hope. But being super attached to that outcome is crazy, and it's like it goes against the flow of life, the flow of reality. You have to just keep it cool, keep it chill. Realizing that you can't control other people, realizing that you can't save other people, realizing that other people will have their opinions of you, and you can't control that, and that's okay. Realizing that you actually have to work with other people. You have to actually be engaged in other people, and you can't really just run away from society. Like, I think that in a way, like when you do get robbed of that innocence and you don't really have that childhood, firstly, there's gonna be something that probably happens where you're gonna try to reclaim that. I think in many cases, like in my case, it was like I wanted to party, I wanted to like get girls, I wanted to like enjoy that life. So I did that a little later. Like when I found myself in Amsterdam and party hostel, I went crazy because I didn't really have that opportunity when I was younger, and I didn't have that opportunity to like lack responsibility, and so I took advantage of it when I got it. I would say this actually can result in a sort of like lifelong habit of chasing meaningless sex, for example. And I actually feel like there is probably a high correlation between like the PUA dudes and the red pill guys, and probably their childhood conditioning. I would say in a lot of cases, like when you are raised by a single mom, you tend to, then this is another weird correlation, but you tend to either go one of two ways. And Jordan Peterson mentioned this actually, and this always rang true to me. You either go the hyper masculine route as a sort of response to the hyper femininity that you're surrounded by, or you go the super feminine route and you get feminized by that extreme feminine energy. Now, I think that I've gone the more masculine route. I definitely am not a pure 100% masculine person, and I definitely have some feminine aspects of me, but for the most part, I'm a masculine person. And I think that that's clearly a result of me like being around so many women when I was young. I grew up around just my mom and my three sisters. And so that always was something I thought about, and I think that made me steer the opposite direction to become a man who, appreciated masculinity, took action, pursued beautiful women, pursued excellence, stood on moral values. This is something that I was always driven to do, as a sort of correction. But at the same time, I would say maybe that is correlated to like that need for reclaiming, at least a part of like the chasing women and not like committing. Maybe that's related to the aspect of the need to reclaim a childhood that was lost, essentially. There's something to say about when you're a kid and you have like young love and you have those youthful, immature experiences, because let's be real, like casual sex and love is a youthful experience. I think that when people mature and they grow up, they realize that A, casual dating is kind of a waste of time and it's just hedonistic fun, and B, they realize that like marriage even is sort of more of a practical arrangement. It's not really about love. It's not about sex after a while. It's really more about what are we going to do in order to have a functional union together, in order to rear children together. And it becomes more about the practicalness, the practicality of it, and the utility of it, and especially for the kids, than it is about us in love. It's like, actually, if you think about it, being in love as a married couple with children is like, the more crazy and intense you are about your own like love life and romance, the more sort of contemptible it becomes, because you're probably neglecting the kids at a certain point, after a certain point, I guess you could say. But anyway, that's just a sort of side observation I thought I had kind of point out. I think when it's no mystery that dudes that are born to single mothers tend to act out, and raised by single mothers, tend to act out in ways throughout their life that are sort of reminiscent of immaturity and like stunted, arrested development, stunted growth. It's because they probably never had that opportunity as kids as much. If there's always this pressure to be an adult, be a responsible person, and be in control, then I think that the consequences that you always try to find that as you're an adult. And I think the best thing to do is just be aware of that, because you don't want to be unconsciously out there behaving in an immature way. Now, I'm not going to comment on whether or not you should be a bachelor, as a man going into your older age. I'm not going to comment on that here. I haven't really answered that question for myself. I'm still in my 20s. I'm still single. We'll just put it that way. But I'm still learning, and I'm still realizing that, there are diminishing returns to this casual dating, and there are certain things you have to keep in mind as you age and as you mature. More importantly, it's like there are things that no longer serve you as you get into your old age, and there are things that are way more practical, especially when you have kids, that you have to keep in mind. And there are things that are definitely indications of immaturity, and things that are definitely indications of maturity. And I would say casual sex and such is probably one of those things. But anyway, I think I've ranted enough here about the pros and the cons and the sort of subtleties of this phenomenon. But I would just say, at the end of the day, you got to keep in mind the certain consequences of when you're raised in an environment like this. When you're raised in an environment where you are responsible for maybe the whole family, maybe your mom, maybe your dad, whatever. There are certain things you have to keep lookout for in ways that you've been conditioned, and you don't want to be controlled by those childhood conditions that lead to how you start to operate. And I really do think there are solutions to that as well. I think that there are solutions via being conscious, via consciously working on yourself and understanding yourself, that help you to really strive forward. And so that's all for now. Peace.